Good to be with you.
I can see you're standing there right in front of the White House. What's your reaction to the president's pick for the Supreme Court?
I think it was an absolute home run. Tonight was a very, very important night for the country. It's the most important decision that President Trump has made in the 2 weeks he's been in office. In the course of the campaign, he promised the American people that he would nominate a principled constitutionalist to replace Justice Scalia. And tonight, in nominating Judge Gorsuch, President Trump has honored that commitment. He's kept his word to the American people.
Do you know Judge Gorsuch personally? Do you know him?
You know, I don't know him personally. I know a lot of people who do know him well, and everyone I know who knows him thinks very, very highly of him. What I have done is I have reviewed a number of his opinions. This week and last week I spent reading some of his key opinions, and I'll tell you, this is a judge who for a decade has a proven record of following the law, of demonstrating judicial humility, not legislating from the bench, not seeking a desired outcome, but simply following the law, following the Constitution, upholding the Bill of Rights. And I think that's exactly what the American people want and expect in a Supreme Court justice.
Nancy Pelosi was on CNN tonight, and she said, you know, elections have ramifications here. This is one of them, that the president, this Republican president, gets to pick someone for the Supreme Court. There are some Democratic senators who are already saying that they're going to oppose this nomination if Democrats try to filibuster the president's SCOTUS pick. And from our reporting, they say they may not. Because they may want to wait till the next time, which is of more importance to them. You say the nuclear option should be on the table, meaning that Senate Republicans change the threshold, clearing a filibuster from 60 to 51 votes. Why do you say that?
Well, I hope Democrats don't choose to filibuster this nomination. We'll see if they do or not. They shouldn't. You know, Judge Gorsuch a decade ago was nominated to the Court of Appeals, and he was confirmed by voice vote, which means not a single Democrat spoke out in opposition to his confirmation. And so what I would ask my Democratic colleagues is what's changed? A decade ago, you were willing to confirm him to the Court of Appeals, and I think, if anything, his record has gotten much, much stronger by having a proven record of faithfulness to the law on the bench. But beyond that, I think on the merits, Judge Gorsuch has demonstrated that he is a fitting replacement, a fitting successor for Justice Scalia, a true lion of the law. And let me say, Don, this process of nominating a Supreme Court justice is the most transparent process in modern history. A year ago, during the campaign, Donald Trump laid out for the American voters a list of 21 potential nominees, and he made an ironclad commitment he would nominate from those 21. That has no precedent in modern times. That meant the American people could vet those 21, know exactly what Donald Trump was promising, and tonight he delivered on that.
Yeah, and so, I mean, you know, you've been in Washington, you know how this works. Democrats, they're still angry that Republicans refuse to hold hearings for Obama's pick, President Obama's pick, Judge Merrick Garland. Do you worry that one day, maybe not with this appointment, but perhaps the next one, that the tables could turn?
Well, look, anything is possible. You're right. A lot of Democrats are angry. They're angry at the results of the election. And a number of them will point to Merrick Garland. You know, I'll point out, Don, the situations are very, very different. Justice Scalia passed away last year right in the middle of a presidential election. It has been 80 years since the Senate has confirmed any judicial vacancy for the Supreme Court that occurred during a presidential election. And the Republican majority in the Senate last year announced, before Merrick Garland was nominated, before anyone was nominated, that we were going to keep this seat open and let the American people decide, that the court really was hanging in the balance. And I think this election was a referendum. It was a referendum for the American people. Do you want a principled constitutionalist who will honor the Constitution, who will uphold the Bill of Rights? Or do you want a liberal judicial activist, which is what Hillary Clinton had promised? And the people spoke on Election Day, and my hope is that Senate Democrats will respect the will of the American people, and that Judge Gorsuch will receive a swift hearing and a swift confirmation.
But Merrick Garland, you know, was not that. Merrick Garland was pretty centrist. People thought that he was fairly, you know, fairly centered, no?
Well, I recognize that may be the sense in the CNN newsroom, but that was not the sense of in the rest of the country. I'm a litigator who's practiced in front of Merrick Garland. I spent a lot of years as a U.S. Supreme Court nominee, and Judge Garland is a smart, capable person, but also who had a systematic record of voting for very liberal outcomes. For example, voting to undermine the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. And Don, I think the voters went to the polls in November, and they said, we don't want a justice like Hillary Clinton has promised to take away our Second Amendment right. We want a justice who will be faithful to the Constitution.
Yeah, I don't want to litigate that. That has been litigated back and forth. But anyway, the only reason I say that, it's not the CNN newsroom. It's just that he was confirmed with a lot of Republican support. Yeah. So that comes from Washington and Republicans, not from the CNN newsroom. But I don't want to dwell on that. Can we move on?
Well, you know, Washington gets a lot of things wrong.
Yeah. Let's talk about the president's executive order, barring travelers from 7 Muslim-majority countries. You support the order, but during the campaign, when then-candidate Trump called for an all-out ban against Muslims traveling to the U.S., you said that that wasn't your policy. Is this policy, to you, a form of a Muslim ban?
Well, Don, describing this executive order as a Muslim ban is not accurate. What the president did is he enacted a common-sense step to impose a 4-month pause on refugee admissions from nations that are war-torn, that have high populations of radical Islamic terrorists, that have high concentrations of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And the reason is the head of the FBI, James Comey, who I would note President Obama appointed, told Congress he couldn't vet those refugees to make sure that they weren't terrorists. And President Trump's decision to pause the refugee program to make sure we're not letting terrorists into this country is a common sense step that the overwhelming majority of the American people agree with, and I think it reflects an administration that's serious about keeping this nation safe and about defeating radical Islamic terrorists.
Do you think that it could have been rolled out better? Because there have been a number of Republicans, high-ranking of Republicans, who have criticized it, but they do support it, but they just say it could have been rolled out better.
You know what? There are always a multitude of people in Washington who want to throw rocks. I'm grateful that we have a president who has as a top priority keeping this country safe.
Let's talk about Obamacare, because Senator Orrin Hatch today said that the president does not appear to have a separate Obamacare plan. Are you aware of a White House plan to replace Obamacare?
Well, I think those discussions are ongoing. What I believe is going to happen is that Congress is going to follow through on the commitment we made to the American people, on the commitment President Trump made to the American people to repeal Obamacare. Obamacare isn't working. I mean, millions of Americans, they've lost their jobs, they've been forced into part-time work, they've lost their health care, their doctors. You know, I would ask folks at home, how many of you have seen your premiums skyrocket through the roof? This thing is a disaster. It's why Bill Clinton called it the craziest thing he's ever seen. And so I believe this spring Congress is going to follow through on our commitment. We're going to repeal Obamacare, and then we're going to pass common sense health care reform that empowers patients, puts you in charge of your health care, includes important reforms like letting you buy health insurance across state lines.
You aren't aware of the White House plan to replace Obamacare at this point?
What I'm aware of is ongoing discussions between the administration and Congress on the contours of a plan. But you know what? There's a lot of agreement on the principles. The principles are that you, the patient, should be in charge of your health care, not the federal government. And those are principles the American people had in front of them in the election. And I think Obamacare, like the Supreme Court, was a major, major factor in President Trump defeating Hillary Clinton in November.
I think it's a foregone conclusion with the Republicans in control and the Republican White House that it will be replaced or changed somehow. I was just wondering if you knew of a plan right now that's on the table. I also want to ask you about the border wall, which would of course directly impact your state. I know you support the actions that the president is taking, but are you concerned that the U.S. may end up footing the bill here? And if the U.S. has to pay for this wall up front, or not, will you support it if it's not offset by spending cuts, new spending cuts?
We need to do everything necessary to secure the border. You know, Texas, we've got 1,200 miles of border with Mexico. I've spent a lot of time down at the border. I've stood on the banks of the Rio Grande, as you can see, illegal aliens huddled on the other side, just waiting for Border Patrol to leave so they can cross illegally. Yeah. It doesn't make any sense, particularly in an age of terror, in an age of ISIS, that we don't know who's coming into this country. And you know, when it comes to a wall, Don, federal law has mandated a physical barrier for years.
Senator Ted Cruz, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're coming right back. He has never gotten a single vote, but he may be the most powerful man in Washington.
Choose to go, to indulge your curiosity.